Michael Chen thought he'd found the perfect neighborhood when he bought his house in Riverside Meadows 8 years ago. The streets were quiet, the neighbors were friendly, and his 2-car garage had enough space for all his hobbies. He worked from home as a software engineer, which gave him plenty of time to tinker with his projects on weekends. His garage was his sanctuary. On one side, he had his vintage motorcycle that he was slowly restoring to its former glory. On the other side, he kept his woodworking tools and lumber for the furniture projects he loved building. The middle had just enough room to park 1 car, with the other spot dedicated to his workbench. It was organized chaos, the kind that made sense to him even if it looked a bit cluttered to outsiders. The thing is, Michael never thought anyone cared. His garage door was often open when he worked on his projects, especially on sunny Saturday afternoons. Neighbors would sometimes walk by and wave, occasionally stopping to chat about what he was building. Nobody had ever complained. Not once in 8 years then. The HOA board elections happened. Patricia Holloway had recently retired from her real estate career and apparently decided that running the homeowners association would be her new full-time job. Within 2 weeks of becoming president, she started what she called her neighborhood beautification initiative. That's corporate speak for finding problems where none existed. Michael first heard about it from his neighbor Tom, who lived 3 houses down. Tom stopped by one evening while Michael was sanding down a bookshelf in his driveway. "Hey, you hear about the new HOA rules?" Tom asked, looking nervous. "What rules?" Michael said, not looking up from his work. "Patricia's going around taking photos of everyone's houses. She's looking for violations, apparently. My wife got a notice about our garden gnomes. Said they're not approved decorations." Michael laughed. "Garden gnomes? Seriously? What's next, measuring our grass with a ruler?" Tom didn't laugh back. "I'm just saying, man. Watch out. She seems pretty serious about this stuff." Michael should have listened. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came certified mail, which should have been his first clue that this wasn't going to be a friendly reminder. He signed for it, figuring it was probably something about the annual HOA fees or maybe a notice about street maintenance. When he opened it, he had to read it 3 times before the words actually made sense. The Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association was citing him for violation of Section 14.3b of the Community Covenants. The violation? Excessive clutter visible in garage causing unsightly appearance detrimental to community standards. They had photographs. Someone had walked by his house and taken pictures through his open garage door. There was his motorcycle, his tools hanging neatly on the wall, his lumber stacked in the corner, his toolboxes, everything he used regularly for his hobbies. The letter said he had 30 days to either keep his garage door closed at all times or completely clear the garage of all non-vehicle items. If he didn't comply, he'd be fined $100 per day. Michael sat down at his kitchen table and stared at the letter. $100 per day for having tools in his garage. The math was simple and terrifying. That was $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year, for storing his own belongings in his own garage. He pulled out his copy of the HOA covenants that night and read through the entire thing. Section 14.3b talked about maintaining properties in good condition and not creating eyesores. It mentioned things like broken down vehicles, piles of trash, and excessive outdoor storage. But tools? A motorcycle being restored? Lumber for active projects? This seemed like a stretch, a big stretch. The next HOA meeting was in 5 days. Michael marked it on his calendar. He'd go and talk to them like a reasonable adult. Show them that his garage was organized, that everything had a purpose, that he wasn't running some kind of junkyard. They'd see it was a misunderstanding and that would be the end of it. He spent those 5 days documenting everything. He took photos of his garage from every angle, showing how organized it actually was. He made a list of every item and its purpose. He even researched similar HOA cases online and found that most courts considered this kind of enforcement to be overly restrictive. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on Tuesday evening. About 20 homeowners showed up, which was more than usual. Apparently word had gotten around that Patricia was cracking down on violations, and people wanted to see what was happening. Michael waded through the usual boring stuff: budget reports, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules. Finally, they got to new business and resident concerns. He raised his hand. "Yes, Michael," Patricia said from her seat at the head table. She had a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I got a violation notice last week about my garage. I'd like to discuss it. The covenants are very clear about maintaining property standards, Patricia said, not missing a beat. She'd clearly been expecting this. I understand that, but I think there might be a misunderstanding. My garage is organized. Everything in it serves a purpose. I'm not storing trash or broken items. These are tools I use regularly. Patricia pulled out a folder. His folder, apparently. She had the photos printed out and she passed them around to the other board members like evidence in a trial. Mr. Chen, when your garage doors open, this is what our residents see. Motorcycle parts scattered around. Wooden tools everywhere. It's simply not the image we want to project in Riverside Meadows. Scattered? Michael felt his frustration rising. Everything is organized. And the motorcycle isn't in parts, it's a complete bike that I'm restoring. The point is, it's visible, Patricia said. Other homeowners have complained. Who complained? Michael looked around the room. Is anyone here bothered by my garage? Nobody spoke up. A few people looked down at their phones or suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. The complaints were submitted privately, Patricia said. We respect our residents' privacy. So anonymous complaints are enough to fine me $100 a day. The board has voted on this matter. The citation stands. You have 30 days to comply. Michael felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about his garage at all. This was about control. This was Patricia flexing her new power, and he was the example she'd chosen to make. I'd like to formally appeal this decision, he said, keeping his voice steady. You have that right. Submit your appeal in writing within 10 days. Michael went home that night and wrote the most detailed appeal he could manage. He included photos, measurements, comparisons to other garages in the neighborhood that had visible storage, and legal precedents about reasonable HOA enforcement. He submitted it the next morning. The response came back in 48 hours. Appeal denied. That's when the second letter arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA directly. It was from a law firm called Whitmore and Associates. They were representing the Riverside Meadows HOA in the matter of his violation. The letter informed him that the HOA was prepared to pursue legal action if he didn't comply immediately. They mentioned fines, attorney fees, and the possibility of a lien on his property. Michael looked at the letterhead. Whitmore and Associates. He'd never heard of them before, but they certainly seemed eager to take his money. Or rather, the HOA's money, since they were the ones who'd have to pay these legal fees. Something about all this felt wrong. The speed of it, the aggression, the complete unwillingness to compromise. This was personal somehow, even though Michael couldn't figure out why. He did what any sensible person would do when facing a lawsuit. He called a lawyer. The attorney's name was Jennifer Park, and she specialized in HOA disputes. When Michael explained the situation over the phone, she was quiet for a moment. Let me get this straight, she finally said. They're threatening to sue you because you have tools in your garage? Apparently. And they've hired outside counsel for this? That's what the letter says. Jennifer laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Mr. Chen, I've been doing this for 15 years. This is either the pettiest HOA I've ever heard of, or something else is going on. Either way, we should probably fight this. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Michael agreed. As he hung up the phone, he looked out his window at his quiet street, at the neighborhood he'd loved for 8 years. How had things gotten so out of control so quickly? He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. And before it was over, Patricia Holloway and her hired lawyers were going to regret the day they decided to mess with his garage. Jennifer Park's office was in a small building downtown, the kind of place where the coffee was always fresh and the receptionist knew everyone's name. Michael arrived 15 minutes early for their meeting, nervous energy making him pace the waiting room. When Jennifer called him in, she already had his file spread across her desk. She was younger than he expected, maybe mid-30s with sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. So I did some digging after our call, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Whitmore and Associates. They're a small firm, mostly real estate law and contract disputes. They don't usually take HOA cases, which is interesting. Why is that interesting? Michael asked. Because HOA disputes are usually small potatoes for a firm like that. The money isn't great unless they drag things out, which looking at their initial letter to you seems to be exactly what they plan to do. She showed him the letter again, pointing out specific phrases. See how they're already mentioning liens and property seizures. That's aggressive for a first contact. Most firms would start with a warning, maybe a mediation offer. These guys went straight for the throat. Michael felt his stomach tighten. So what do I do? We fight back. File a counterclaim challenging the reasonableness of their interpretation. The covenant language is vague enough that we can argue they're overreaching. Plus, I want to look into whether they're enforcing this rule fairly across the community. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer did exactly that. She sent formal requests for all HOA violation records from the past 5 years. She drove through Riverside Meadows with a camera, documenting other homes. What she found was damning. 3 houses had boats parked in their driveways under covers. 2 had landscaping equipment visible in open garages. 1 house had an entire woodworking shop set up in their garage with the door open most weekends. None of them had received violations. "This is selective enforcement," Jennifer said during their next meeting, showing him the photos. "And that's legally problematic for them. They can't just decide to target you while ignoring everyone else." But when Jennifer filed their counterclaim and evidence of selective enforcement, Whitmore and Associates responded with something Michael didn't expect. They escalated. The new filing claimed Michael was being willfully defiant and that his refusal to comply was damaging property values in the entire neighborhood. They were now seeking $15,000 in fines and attorney fees, plus a court injunction forcing immediate compliance. $15,000. Michael stared at the number. "For tools in my garage? They're counting from the date of the first notice," Jennifer explained. "At $100 a day plus their legal fees. It's a scare tactic. They want you to fold." "I'm not folding." "Good, because it gets weirder." Jennifer pulled out another document. "I started looking into the HOA's finances as part of discovery. Guess how much they're paying Whitmore and Associates?" "I don't know." "A few thousand? Try $450 per hour for a garage dispute. And here's the kicker." She slid a document across the desk. "Patricia Holloway's nephew Dylan is a junior partner at Whitmore and Associates." Michael blinked. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. She's basically funneling HOA money to her nephew's law firm. The other homeowners have no idea how much this is costing them. Their reserves are going to be drained by the end of the year if this keeps up." Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't about his garage at all. This was a scheme. Patricia gets to play the powerful HOA president, while her nephew bills hundreds of hours at premium rates. Michael was just the convenient target they'd chosen. "Can we use this?" Michael asked. "We can mention it, but nepotism isn't illegal." "Unethical." "Absolutely. But proving corruption in an HOA is tricky. What we need is leverage." Michael went home that night feeling angry and helpless. He'd done nothing wrong, but somehow he was stuck in a legal battle that was costing him time, money, and peace of mind. The lawsuit was affecting his work, his sleep, his whole life. He couldn't stop thinking about Whitmore and Associates. About how smug they'd been in their letters. About how they clearly expected him to just give up and pay whatever they demanded. That's when he started doing his own research. Not about the law, but about the law firm itself. He found their website first. Professional photos, corporate language about dedicated service and client-focused solutions. 4 attorneys total, including Dylan Holloway, who looked fresh out of law school in his headshot. Then he found their address. A professional building on Grant Street, about 20 minutes from his house. He drove by it one afternoon just to see. It was a nice building, well-maintained, probably built in the 80s. 3 businesses had signs out front. Whitmore and Associates, a dental office, and an insurance agency. Out of curiosity, he checked the county property records. The building was owned by something called Riverside Commercial Holdings, LLC. He dug deeper into the corporate records. The LLC was owned by 2 partners who lived out of state. Investment property, most likely. On a whim, he called a commercial real estate broker he'd worked with years ago on an office lease for his startup. "Hey Derek, random question. If someone wanted to buy a small commercial building, how would they go about it?" Derek launched into an explanation about listings, inspections, financing. Michael half listened, an idea forming in the back of his mind. "What if I wanted to look at what's available in the Grant Street area?" Michael asked. "I can send you some listings." "You thinking about buying an office?" "Maybe, just exploring options." The listings arrived in his email that evening. Most were too big or too expensive for what Michael was thinking. But then he saw it. The building on Grant Street. The one where Whitmore and Associates had their office. For sale. Prime commercial property. 8,000 SQFT. 3 established tenants. Stable income stream. Asking $2.3 million. Michael stared at his computer screen for a long time. $2.3 million was a lot of money. But his software startup had been acquired the year before, for a number he still had trouble wrapping his head around. After taxes and paying off his house, he had enough left over to make this purchase without breaking a sweat. The question wasn't whether he could afford it. The question was whether he should. He called Derek back. That building on Grant Street, the one for sale. Can you get me information on the tenants and their leases? Sure, but that's usually part of the due diligence process after you make an offer. I want to see it first. Before I decide if I'm interested. Derek worked his magic, and 2 days later, Michael had a folder full of information. The building had 3 tenants, all on commercial leases. The dental office had a 5-year lease with 3 years remaining. The insurance agency had a 7-year lease with 4 years left. Whitmore and Associates had a 3-year lease that was expiring in 6 months. Michael read that line 5 times. 6 months. Their lease was up in 6 months, and they'd need to either renew or move. He thought about Patricia and her nephew, about the $15,000 they were trying to squeeze out of him, about the smug letters and the aggressive legal tactics. He thought about how they'd turned his peaceful life upside down over something as stupid as tools in a garage. And then he thought about what would happen if he owned their building. The idea was crazy. It was petty. It was possibly the most vindictive thing he'd ever considered doing in his entire life. But it was also completely legal. Michael called Derek one more time. I want to make an offer on the Grant Street property. All cash. Can you set that up? Seriously? You don't want to see it first? Get an inspection? Set up the inspection, but yes, I'm serious. Let's move fast on this. How fast? As fast as legally possible. Derek was quiet for a moment. Okay, man. Your money. I'll draw up the offer. What are you thinking for price? Start at $2.15 million, but I'm willing to go up to the asking price if needed. I want this deal closed. You got it. Can I ask what you're planning to do with it? Michael smiled. I'm going to be a landlord, Derek. Just a regular landlord managing my investment property. He didn't mention that one of his tenants was currently suing him. That would come as a surprise later. Over the next 3 weeks, while the lawsuit continued its slow march through the court system, Michael worked on buying the building. The inspection came back clean. The seller was motivated as Derek had promised. They countered at $2.25 million, and Michael accepted immediately. Jennifer noticed something was different about him during their meetings. You seem happier, she said one afternoon as they reviewed depositions. Did something good happen? Just making some investments, Michael said. Diversifying my portfolio. Well, it agrees with you. Though I should warn you, Whitmore is pushing for an expedited hearing. They really want to get this in front of a judge. Leary, let them push. We've got time. What he didn't say was that time was exactly what he needed. Just a few more weeks for the sale to close. Just a little longer for all the pieces to fall into place. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning. Michael signed what felt like 100 documents, transferred the money, and walked out of the title company as the owner of the building on Grant Street. He spent the rest of the day driving around just thinking. He now owned the place where the people suing him came to work every day. They had no idea. Nobody had any idea. For the first week after buying the building, Michael did absolutely nothing. He didn't announce himself. He didn't visit the property. He just went about his life, working on his projects and attending his court dates, while Whitmore and Associates continued their aggressive legal campaign, completely unaware that their landlord situation had changed. The property management company he'd inherited with the building sent him the usual reports. Rent collected on time, no maintenance issues, everything running smoothly. He reviewed the files on all 3 tenants, paying special attention to the Whitmore lease. They were paying $6,500 a month for their suite, which was about 1,500 square feet. The lease had been signed 3 years ago, and according to the property records, the rent hadn't increased since then. Michael had his broker pull comparable rates for similar office space in the area. The market rate was now closer to $11,000 per month. Whitmore and Associates had been getting a very good deal. Michael's first official act as the new property owner was sending introduction letters to all his tenants. He kept them professional and friendly. Standard landlord stuff about how he looked forward to continuing positive relationships, how to contact him for maintenance issues, and reminding them of lease renewal timelines. He sent them on a Friday afternoon, The dental office and insurance agency both responded politely, welcoming him as the new owner. Whitmore and Associates didn't respond at all. Michael hadn't expected them to. He doubted they even connected the name on the letter with their opponent in the HOA lawsuit. Chen was a common enough name, and they'd been referring to him as Mr. Chen in all their legal filings. They probably never even looked at his first name. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was reaching its interesting phase. Jennifer had filed their counterclaim with all the evidence of selective enforcement. She'd also requested documents showing how much the HOA had spent on legal fees, arguing that Patricia was wasting community resources on a frivolous dispute. The HOA had to produce those documents as part of discovery. When they arrived, even Jennifer was shocked. "They've spent $48,000 so far," she said, showing Michael the accounting. "On a case about garage storage, the HOA only has about $60,000 in reserves. Patricia is literally bankrupting the community association over this. Does anyone else know about this? Not yet. But they will when this goes to trial. Every homeowner in Riverside Meadows is going to see exactly where their money went." Michael thought about his neighbors, people like Tom who'd been hassled about garden gnomes. People who paid their HOA fees expecting that money to maintain common areas and pay for pool cleaning, not to fund Patricia's personal vendetta. "Can we make this public before the trial?" he asked. "We can file it as evidence and court records are public, but there's a better way." Jennifer pulled up the HOA bylaws on her computer. According to their own rules, any homeowner can request a special meeting if they get signatures from 20% of the community. That's about 30 houses. Think you can get 30 people to sign a petition? Michael thought about Tom and all the other neighbors who'd been quietly grumbling about Patricia's enforcement crusade. "Yeah, I think I can." That weekend, Michael went door to door. He didn't have to explain much. Most people were already frustrated with Patricia. The garden gnomes, the paint color approvals, the new restrictions on holiday decorations. She'd made enemies all over the neighborhood in just a few months. When he showed them the legal bill, their frustration turned to anger. $48,000? Tom stared at the document. "That's almost our entire reserve fund." "For a lawsuit about someone's garage," Michael added. "My garage, specifically. This is insane. Where do I sign?" Michael got his 30 signatures in 2 days. He got 73 total. More than half the neighborhood wanted Patricia out. The special meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the lawsuit continued. Michael had to sit through a deposition where Dylan Holloway himself asked questions, trying to paint Michael as some kind of hoarder who was ruining property values. "Mr. Chen, would you say you have an excessive attachment to material possessions?" Dylan asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'd say I have normal hobbies that require normal tools," Michael replied calmly. "But you refuse to simply keep your garage door closed, which would solve this entire problem." "I refuse to be bullied into hiding legal activities on my own property." "Yes," Dylan smirked like he'd scored a point. Michael wondered how that smirk would look in a few months when the lease renewal notice arrived. The special HOA meeting was packed. Michael had never seen the clubhouse so full. People were standing along the walls, sitting on the floor, cramming in to see what would happen. Patricia sat at the head table looking pale and defensive. Tom stood up first. He'd volunteered to present the financial evidence. "For those who don't know, our HOA has spent $48,000 in legal fees over the past 4 months. That's 80% of our reserve fund. This money was supposed to be for emergencies, for maintaining our common areas, for things that benefit all of us." He projected the invoices on the screen, page after page of charges from Whitmore and Associates, $450 per hour, sometimes for things as simple as reviewing an email or making a phone call. The room erupted in angry voices. "This is about Michael's garage?" someone called out. "Are you kidding me? We don't have money to fix the pool heater, but we're spending thousands on this?" Patricia tried to regain control. "The board has a responsibility to enforce our covenants. Mr. Chen was in clear violation. My son has a workbench in our garage." Another neighbor shouted, "Are you going to sue us next?" "I have fishing equipment visible in mine. This is selective enforcement." The meeting descended into chaos. People were furious. They'd been paying their fees faithfully, and Patricia had burned through their collective savings on a personal grudge. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Patricia was removed as HOA president by a margin of 67 to 8. Two other board members who'd supported her were also voted out. The new interim president was a retired accountant named Helen, who immediately moved to drop the lawsuit against Michael. "We need to cut our losses," Helen said. "We can't afford to keep paying these legal bills." But Whitmore and Associates had other ideas. They sent a letter saying the HOA couldn't just drop the case. There were contractual obligations, fees owed, work already completed. They wanted to be paid for all their hours even if the case was withdrawn. The bill came to $62,000, more than the HOA had in reserves. Helen called an emergency meeting. "We might have to do a special assessment. That means everyone in the neighborhood would have to pay extra to cover this." Michael listened to the angry responses from his neighbors. None of this was their fault. They were victims of Patricia's scheme just as much as he was. That night he made a decision. He called Jennifer. "If I agree to drop my counterclaim and let them dismiss the case, will that reduce the legal fees?" "Probably, but Michael, we're winning. We have evidence of selective enforcement, evidence of financial misconduct." "I know. But my neighbors are going to pay for this if it continues. They don't deserve that." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "You're a better person than I am. But okay. I'll reach out to Whitmore and propose a mutual dismissal. No fines, no fees, everyone walks away." "Not everyone walks away," Michael said. "I still want a written acknowledgement from the HOA that my garage storage is in compliance. I'm not going to live under this threat anymore." "I can get that." The negotiation took a week. Whitmore and Associates pushed back hard, trying to extract at least partial payment for their fees. But Helen held firm. The HOA was broke, and if Whitmore wanted to fight about it, they could sue an organization with no money. Finally, they agreed. Mutual dismissal, no fines, no fees. The new HOA board would issue a letter stating that Michael's garage was in compliance with reasonable interpretation of the covenants. Michael got his letter on a Tuesday. It was brief and formal, but it said what mattered. He was in the clear. The lawsuit was over. But Michael's plans were just getting started. 2 weeks after the case was dismissed, he had his property manager send out lease renewal notices to all the tenants at the Grant Street building. The dental office received a renewal with a 3% rent increase, standard for the market. The insurance agency got the same. Whitmore and Associates received a very different letter. Their current rent of $6,500 per month was being adjusted to $17,000 per month, effective upon lease renewal. The increase was based on current market rates for comparable office space in the area. They had 60 days to accept the new terms or vacate the premises. Michael was in his garage working on his motorcycle when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Is this Michael Chen?" The voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Speaking. This is James Whitmore. I just received a lease renewal notice that appears to be some kind of mistake." "No mistake, Mr. Whitmore. The rent is going up to market rates." "Market rates? This is a 162% increase." "Yes, your previous rate was quite below market. I had the property appraised. I can send you the comparable lessee." The fallout from the lease renewal notice was immediate and entertaining. Within 2 days of receiving it, Whitmore and Associates had contacted 3 different real estate attorneys to see if they could fight the increase. Michael knew this because Jennifer had friends all over the local legal community, and word traveled fast. All 3 attorneys apparently told Whitmore the same thing. Commercial landlords have wide discretion on lease renewals. The proposed rate was within market range, and fighting it would cost more than just relocating. Michael went about his normal life, working on his projects and watching the situation unfold. His property manager handled all the actual communication with the tenants, which gave him a comfortable layer of separation. He was just a property owner making business decisions. Nothing personal about it at all. 2 weeks after the renewal notice, Dylan Holloway showed up at Michael's house. Michael was in his driveway, washing his car when a silver sedan pulled up and Dylan got out. He looked different outside the formal setting of depositions and courtrooms. Younger, less sure of himself. His expensive suit seemed out of place in the suburban neighborhood on a Saturday morning. "Mr. Chen," Dylan said, walking up the driveway. "I was hoping we could talk." Michael kept washing his car. "About what?" "The lease renewal. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. The rent is going up to market rates. It's all in the letter." Dylan shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Look, I know the lawsuit got heated. Things were said, positions were taken, but that's over now. This seems like, the timing is coincidental, Michael suggested, rinsing off his hood. I was going to say convenient. Mr. Holloway, I bought that building as an investment. The fact that your firm leases space there has nothing to do with my decisions as a landlord. If you don't like the new terms, you're free to lease space elsewhere. The increase is unreasonable. Michael finally stopped and looked at him directly. You charged your aunt's HOA $450 an hour to sue me over tools in my garage. You billed them for reviewing emails, for phone calls, for consultations that probably lasted 10 minutes. You cost that HOA almost their entire reserve fund, and now you want to talk to me about what's unreasonable. Dylan's face went red. That was different. That was legal work. And this is property management. I'm sure you understand business decisions, being an attorney and all. We can't afford $17,000 a month. Then I guess you'll need to move. Michael went back to washing his car. You have 60 days. That should be plenty of time to find something in your price range. Dylan stood there for another minute, clearly wanting to say more, but apparently thinking better of it. He got back in his car and drove away. Jennifer called that afternoon. I heard Dylan made a house call. News travels fast. He called me after, trying to get me to convince you to reconsider. I told him I'm your HOA attorney, not your property manager. But Michael, they're getting desperate. The firm's been looking at office spaces all week. Everything in the area that's comparable is in the same price range you're charging. So I'm being fair. You're being more than fair. You're being perfectly, legally, undeniably fair, which is what makes this so beautiful. Michael smiled. How's the HOA situation? Helen's doing a good job as president. They're rebuilding their reserves, and she's drafting new guidelines that actually make sense. No more surprise violations. Everything has to go through a proper review process now. You should be happy you basically reformed an entire HOA. I just wanted to work on my motorcycle in peace. Well, you got that, and also became a commercial landlord who's making your enemies homeless. I'd call that a win. What Michael didn't tell Jennifer was that he'd been doing more research on the Grant Street building, specifically on what Whitmore and Associates had done to their leased space over the past 3 years. Commercial leases typically require tenants to get approval for any modifications to the space. Michael had his property manager pull the files. There were supposed to be forms, permits, approvals. What he found instead were notes from the previous owner about unapproved changes. Whitmore and Associates had knocked down a non-load-bearing wall to create a larger conference room. They'd installed custom built-in shelving. They'd even updated some of the electrical work to add more outlets and better lighting. All of this without proper approval or permits. The lease was very clear. Any modifications had to be approved in writing, and any changes made without approval had to be returned to original condition at the tenant's expense when they vacated. Michael called his property manager, a woman named Rita, who'd been managing the building for years. Rita, this file about the modifications at Whitmore's office. Did the previous owner know about all this? Oh yeah, Rita said. He complained about it constantly. But he was old and tired and didn't want the hassle of fighting with attorneys. He figured he'd deal with it when they moved out. And now I get to deal with it? Technically, yes. But you could just let it go like he did. Michael thought about the $48,000 in legal fees. About the stress and sleepless nights. About sitting through depositions where Dylan Holloway treated him like a criminal for having hobbies. No, he said. I think we should enforce the lease. Can you get estimates on what it would cost to return the space to its original condition? Rita was quiet for a moment. You're really going to make them pay for that? The lease says they have to. I'm just following the contract. Okay, boss. I'll get some contractors out there. The estimates came back a week later. $42,000 to remove the custom work, repair the wall, and restore the electrical system to its original configuration. The space had to be returned in the condition it was leased, and that meant undoing 3 years of unauthorized modifications. Rita sent the notice to Whitmore and Associates as part of the standard move-out requirements. Michael imagined their faces when they read it. James Whitmore called him directly this time. This is harassment, Whitmore said without preamble. This is a lease requirement, Michael replied calmly. Your firm made unauthorized modifications to the space. The lease clearly states those modifications must be removed at tenant expense when vacating. The previous owner knew about this. He never said anything. The previous owner isn't the current owner, I am. And I'm enforcing the lease terms that your firm agreed to when you signed it. This is because of the lawsuit. You're using your position as landlord to retaliate against us for legitimate legal work we did for a client." Michael let the accusation hang in the air for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "Mr. Whitmore, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm simply a property owner enforcing the terms of a commercial lease. If you made unauthorized modifications to leased property, that's your mistake, not mine. The fact that we were on opposite sides of a now-dismissed lawsuit is completely irrelevant to my responsibilities as a landlord. No judge is going to believe that. Feel free to file a lawsuit. I'm sure you know some good attorneys." "Oh wait," Michael let that sink in. "Look, Mr. Whitmore, you have two options. You can pay to restore the space to its original condition, or you can leave it as is and I'll deduct the restoration costs from your security deposit and bill you for the remainder. Either way, the work is getting done and you're paying for it. Those are the terms of your lease." Whitmore hung up without another word. Jennifer found the whole thing hilarious when Michael told her about it. They modified the space without permission? That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. They can't claim retaliation because you're just enforcing existing lease terms. I thought you might appreciate that. Appreciate it? Michael, you're like a chess player who thinks 5 moves ahead. How did you even think to check for modifications? I'm thorough. Learned that from being sued. Over the next few weeks, Michael watched the situation develop. Whitmore and Associates found a new office space across town. It was smaller in an older building, and the rent was still $14,000 per month. They'd actually save money compared to Michael's renewal offer, but the space was definitely a step down from their current location. They tried one more time to negotiate. Dylan called the property manager, suggesting they could do the restoration work themselves to save money. Rita ran it by Michael. "They're saying they'll fix everything themselves if we can waive the contractor requirement." "No," Michael said. "Licensed contractors only. I want it documented properly." The real reason was simple. If Whitmore did the work themselves, they'd do the bare minimum and claim it was sufficient. With licensed contractors, everything would be done to code and properly documented. No shortcuts, no arguments. As the move-out date approached, Whitmore and Associates finally accepted reality. They hired contractors and the work began. Michael got weekly updates from Rita about the progress. The custom shelving came out. The wall went back up. The electrical work was returned to original specs. Every change they'd made over 3 years was systematically undone. The final bill came to $41,800. Their security deposit was $12,000. Whitmore and Associates had to cut a check for the remaining $29,800. Michael received the check on a Tuesday afternoon. He looked at it for a long time, thinking about everything that happened. 6 months after Whitmore and Associates moved out of the Grant Street building, Michael's life had finally returned to something resembling normal. He still worked from home, still spent his weekends on his hobbies, and still kept his garage door wide open whenever he felt like it. The legal aid clinic had moved into their new space and was already helping dozens of people navigate disputes with landlords and HOAs. Michael would sometimes drive by and see their lights on late into the evening. Attorneys and volunteers working to help people who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. It felt good, knowing that something positive had come from all the chaos. The Grant Street property was doing well financially. The dental office and insurance agency were stable, reliable tenants. The legal clinic paid their reduced rent on time every month, and even sent Michael a thank you card when they moved in. Rita handled the day-to-day management, and Michael barely had to think about it. His investment had paid off in ways he hadn't expected. Not just financially, but in peace of mind. Every time he thought about Patricia and her nephew and their failed attempt to bully him, he could look at his property portfolio and smile. The new HOA board was running Riverside Meadows smoothly. Helen had implemented common-sense rules that actually made the neighborhood better, without harassing residents over minor issues. They'd rebuilt the reserve fund through careful budgeting, and had even managed to upgrade the pool area with the money they were no longer wasting on frivolous lawsuits. Tom stopped by one Saturday while Michael was working on a bookshelf in his driveway. "Community looks good these days," Tom said, handing Michael a cold drink. "Yeah, Helen's doing a great job. You know what's funny? My wife still has her garden gnomes. Nobody said a word about them." Tom laughed. All that drama over nothing. Michael thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the legal battles, the sleepless nights wondering if he'd lose his house over tools in his garage. It had seemed overwhelming at the time. Not nothing, Michael said. We learned what kind of HOA we want to be. Sometimes it takes a crisis to figure that out. I guess. Still, I can't believe Patricia thought she could get away with it, using HOA money to pay her nephew's law firm. That's just corrupt. People get away with what others let them get away with. She just picked the wrong target. After Tom left, Michael finished his bookshelf and carried it inside. His house was full of furniture he'd built himself, each piece representing hours of careful work. His garage was full of tools and materials for the next project. This was who he was, and he'd been willing to fight to protect that. A few weeks later, he got an unexpected email. It was from Dylan Holloway. The subject line just said, "Apology." Michael stared at it for a moment before opening it. The email was short. "Mr. Chen, I owe you an apology. What my aunt and I did was wrong. We took advantage of our positions and targeted you unfairly. The lawsuit should never have happened, and I should have advised against it instead of seeing it as an opportunity. I've left Whitmore and Associates, and I'm taking some time to reconsider my career choices. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just wanted you to know that I understand what we did was wrong. Dylan Holloway." Michael read it 3 times. He thought about responding, maybe saying something about learning from mistakes or how everyone deserves a second chance. But in the end, he just closed the email without replying. Some apologies didn't need a response. The fact that Dylan had sent it was enough. Jennifer called him that afternoon for their now monthly check-in. Even though the case was long over, they'd become friends through the process. "So I heard something interesting," she said. "Whitmore and Associates is struggling. They lost 2 major clients after word got around about the HOA case. Apparently being known as the firm that wastes money on petty disputes isn't great for business. Can't say I'm surprised. James Whitmore is apparently considering retiring early. The firm might not even survive another year." Michael thought about that. A law firm collapsing because they'd been too aggressive, too greedy, too willing to take advantage of a situation. There was justice in it, even if he hadn't directly caused it. "Sometimes karma works faster than expected," he said. "Speaking of which, how's your property investment going?" "Good. The legal clinic just took on a case against an HOA 3 neighborhoods over. Apparently the HOA president there was doing the same thing Patricia did, using association funds for personal benefit. The clinic is representing the homeowners pro bono." Jennifer laughed. "So your donation is already paying dividends. You basically created an HOA accountability machine." "I just wanted to help people who can't afford good legal representation." "Sure, Michael. Keep telling yourself this wasn't at least a little bit about revenge," he smiled. "Maybe 5% revenge. 95% helping people. I'll take it." That evening, Michael hosted a small barbecue in his backyard. Just a few neighbors, nothing fancy. Helen from the HOA board was there, along with Tom and his wife and a few other people from the street. They talked about normal neighborhood stuff. Whose kids were doing well in school, who was planning a vacation, whether they should organize a block party for the summer. Nobody mentioned the lawsuit or Patricia or any of the drama that had consumed their lives months earlier. It felt like healing. As the sun set and people started heading home, Helen pulled Michael aside. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. You could have just paid the fine and moved on, saved yourself a lot of trouble. But you stood up for what was right, and it made all of us braver. I just didn't want to hide my hobbies. It was more than that. You showed us that we don't have to accept abuse from people in power, even when it's just HOA power. That matters." After everyone left, Michael cleaned up and went into his garage. His motorcycle restoration was almost complete. Just a few more weekends of work and it would be ready to ride. He ran his hand along the fuel tank, admiring how the new paint job had turned out. This bike had been the technical cause of all his problems. If he'd been restoring it in a closed garage, if he'd kept the door shut like Patricia demanded, none of the drama would have happened. But then he wouldn't have learned what he was capable of when pushed. He wouldn't have helped reform an HOA or created opportunities for people who needed legal help. He wouldn't have discovered that sometimes standing your ground leads to better outcomes than backing down. His phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Rita, his property manager. "Hey Michael, got interest from a tech startup wanting to lease the Whitmore space when the legal clinic's lease is up in 3 years. They're offering above market rate. Thought you'd want to know. Rita. Michael looked around his garage at his tools and projects and the open door that had started everything. He thought about the building across town that he now owned. About the space where his enemies used to work that was now helping people fight against exactly the kind of abuse he'd faced. He wrote back, "Let's keep the legal clinic as long as they want to stay. Some things are more valuable than maximum rent." Rita's response came back immediately. "You're a good landlord even if you're a little weird about it." Michael laughed and put his phone away. He turned on his work light and got back to his motorcycle. He had a carburetor to fine-tune and a beautiful evening to work. Through his open garage door, he could see his neighborhood. The street he'd fought to stay in, the community he'd helped save from corruption, the home where he could pursue his hobbies in peace. A car drove by slowly, and the driver waved. Michael waved back. He didn't recognize them, but that was okay. Word had probably spread about what happened. About the guy who bought his enemy's building and turned their office into a legal aid clinic. He'd become a bit of a neighborhood legend. Though that had never been the goal. The motorcycle gleamed under the work light, almost complete. Michael picked up his wrench and got back to work. He had a vision for how this bike should look and run, and he was going to see it through, just like he'd seen the lawsuit through, just like he'd seen the property acquisition through. When Michael Chen set his mind to something, he finished it. His garage was still cluttered with tools and parts and projects. His door was still wide open for anyone passing by to see. But now, instead of citations and lawsuits, all he got were waves from neighbors and occasional visits from people curious about his work. The mounted sign he'd put up months ago still hung on the wall. Chen Workshop, Etcher 2023, where hobbies trump harassment. Below it, he'd recently added a smaller sign that Jennifer had made for him as a gift. It was a quote from an old saying, "The best revenge is living well." Though Michael might have edited it slightly in his head, the best revenge is living well and buying your enemy's office building. He smiled at the thought and tightened a bolt on his motorcycle. The engine was going to purr when he finally started it up. All this work, all these months of restoration would be worth it, just like all the stress and fighting had been worth it, because he'd won more than just a lawsuit. He'd won his freedom, his peace, and his right to be himself in his own home. And really, wasn't that what everyone was fighting for? The evening air was cool and perfect. Michael worked on his bike until the stars came out, his garage door open wide exactly as it should be. In the distance,